Welcome to the BriteVibe podcast. At BriteVibe, we believe everyone deserves to be happy. But in today's world, everywhere you turn, there is division and negativity. At BriteVibe, we have created a global movement to bring 8 million people together who are inspired to live bright, live bold, and share bright vibes. Alone, it can be hard to change, but together we can change the world. Welcome to the BriteVibe podcast. All right, Cari Jacobs-Crovetto, welcome to the BriteVibe podcast. So happy to have you on.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, Matt.
Yes, we're going to have a fun conversation today about leadership. But first, I just love saying your name, Crovetto. We talked about it, that you're from Argentina and Italian. You got some of both there. A lot of passion in those two cultures, right? Italian and Argentina.
My husband.
Oh, is that right? Yeah.
My husband is from
I love it. Yeah.
I'm actually Middle Eastern. He's Argentina. Put us together, you get a lot of passion.
I bet that's going to be fun when you have discussions. That's going to be lots of fun when you have discussions.
There's a lot of boundary management.
Yeah. And you're a leadership expert, you're a leaship consultant, you're a leadership coach, and now I understand why you got to be one to be married, right? To stay married.
Absolutely.
In that field. That's a lot of firepower. Yeah, I bet.
I like that. I'm going to rebrand that as firepower.
Firepower, yes. No, I visited South America a couple times, Peru specifically, and I've been to Brazil and places like that. But I spent quite a bit of time in Peru, and man, I just love the culture of South America. I just love the passion and everything so almost romantic, and the food and the speech and everything's just just wonderful. It's just I loved it. I love South American culture. It's very cool.
Well, I think, as you say, most passionate people in the world are the ones that sometimes create the most innovative, new, breakthrough ways of doing things. And we also have sort of an underbelly. That passion can get us into trouble, which is a little bit of what we'll talk about today.
A little bit of an edge comes with that passion usually, right?
A little bit of an edge, a little shadow side.
And if it's not managed properly, it can be, kind of challenging for others and challenging for us.
Exactly.
Right. So tell us a little bit about, I know you teach at some schools that some places that we would, our listeners would know. So you have a class at Stanford, correct?
I do. I facilitate a course called Interpersonal Dynamics, also known affectionately as the touchy-feely course at Stanford. It's in the MBA school.
Nice.
And it is an option course, but there's always a waiting list. And we really teach how to give and receive feedback, how to look critically at yourself, how to handle conflict, which is oftentimes at a school like Stanford and many type A people, we live from the neck up. And much of what we forget about is the body, the somatic self, what we're feeling, even being able to recognize what we're feeling. And then we're taught, we kind of double down on that at work, and we say, okay, oftentimes, we perceive work as a place where feelings are checked at the door.
Right.
We're trying to manage our impulses and manage our feelings. And so we actually bring that all into the room and work with it.
Nice. And you've got some, with your website when I'm doing all my research, but you've got some really cool companies that you've consulted with, coached with. You've got like on there, I think I saw, there we go. LinkedIn. You've got Amazon, GitHub, so some of the cool, trendy companies, right? PlayStation. So there's a lot of, you work with companies that I would say are probably more leaning towards having leadership development than maybe some other companies that aren't as, when you look at something like Amazon, I think, there's a company that's wanting to develop leaders, right? Because their growth is just so fast, right? You have to grow leaders. You can't, I don't care if you love Amazon or hate Amazon. Everybody has it, but if you love it or hate it, but you know that for that business, if you're a business leader, for that to grow as fast as it has to have good leadership, at training at some level, or otherwise it just blow apart, right? None of us would be getting our packages in 2 days. That wouldn't happen, right?
Right. And you make a really good point, which is that you can draw a very direct line from great leadership to great and innovative companies. And some of these companies like LinkedIn, like Amazon, they understand that by developing and training not only their mid-level managers, but their executive teams, that in part has a direct link into the success of their company. It's always hard to still prove that. There's a lot of challenging ways that, people like me and companies that are in the coaching space are trying to prove how to create those direct line and metrics. But I think just intuitively we know
Yeah, well, yeah, yeah, of course. I mean, you think of Apple like a Steve Jobs, right? Apple's doing great. We talked a little bit about, or was doing. I mean, when Steve was there the first time, it was doing great, but the culture was starting to lag a little bit because of probably the shadow side of Steve's personality, right? And so they kick him out, right? But then the company struggles because the innovation's gone, right? And so then he comes back, years they ask him to come back years later, and then I've got to believe, well, I watched the movie, right? So I must know everything about that about Apple, but he comes back, he's a little bit more balanced, maybe not as edgy as he was the first round, and then he rebuilds Apple to, now I think it's the number one valued company in the world, Apple, I think that, or at least
Yeah.
in the States. And so that's kind of that balance of when innovation works, but then when we have too much of what would you call that Steve kind of uh, that edge? Because he was super quirky from what I understand.
He was quirky. I mean, Steve was a visionary
Right.
who had a very sort of top down style,
Mhm.
right? Like he sort of knew what he wanted to do, and he leaned on several people in his company, but it was a handful of people at the end of the day, I think, who really stewarded what was his vision. I think the difference between sort of him and Tim, for example, if you look at the
Right.
archetype of it,
Mhm.
I'm not saying Tim specifically, but the archetype of
Yeah.
Tim, right? He's much more
Right.
benevolent leader.
Right.
And
I think of him
so,
as more of a manager than a visionary, if that makes sense.
yeah, very much so. I mean, there
Yeah.
are stories of him actually being quite a hard ass as well when he has to
Right.
be, right?
Yeah,
But
yeah.
by and large, as a leader and how he sort of approached the investor community in Wall Street,
Mhm.
his approach has been much more benevolent and inspiring
Right.
the people that work at Apple versus sort of that top down visionary style that Steve had.
Right,
Yeah, and,
exactly.
I was gonna say, I work with a lot of sort of founding startup teams as
Mhm.
well. That's one of my sweet spots, and that's a question that comes up often, right? Which is, how do I, as a visionary, drive innovation and drive new thinking and drive productivity while also being empathetic and creating a
Mhm.
culture of inspiration through empathy? And those things are oftentimes at odds. And I think that you raise a really good, 2 points of a really good duality with Tim
Right.
Cook and
Right.
with Steve Jobs.
Right.
And, both get the job done,
Mhm.
right, in
Yeah.
very different ways,
Right.
right?
I'm an entrepreneur, so I'm typically a founder and then grow stuff, right? That's my energy. And so, what it takes to kind of get the plane off the ground versus what it takes to keep it in the air, two very different skill sets. In fact, I went through a leadership program. They called it two in a box. Basically, you have to have that, that strong visionary that holds that visionary space. But then you also have to have somebody who's extremely tactical and can then take that vision and continue and expand it. Otherwise, the visionary a lot of times will crash and burn because they don't ever get out of their own way, so to speak, or they don't get out of the way of the company. And so to scale, you can't just vision yourself. You wear your people out. You right. You do things
Yeah.
that aren't the best for the company because you're holding maybe too high a standard to get it to keep it in the air, so to speak. It's like, no, it's got to fly faster. It's got to fly faster. And eventually the wings pop off the thing and it hits the ground, right?
Well, it's a very good segue into talking about where we are in history,
Right. Well,
right?
yeah,
Because
yeah.
in some ways you can say we were just at that sort of visionary accelerate point
Mhm.
when the pandemic hit, right?
Right.
We
Yep.
were flying at a very high speed.
Mhm.
Pandemic hits, wings pop off the plane. Right. We have this
Mhm.
moment in time where we have, I think one of your guests, Bruce, called it like this
Mhm.
earthquake moment. Right. We have
Yes.
this
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
society,
Lifequake.
right? We have
Lifequake.
lifequake.
Yep.
We have this
Yep.
lifequake moment
Uh-huh.
for
Yep.
ourselves, right?
Right.
As a society, as a global world. And
Mhm.
now we're just out of that. And we're in this place of sort of what some might call a contraction,
Mhm.
right? Where in
Mhm.
many ways, what you're talking about is going from visionary scale, 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 push, push. And now how do we just land and run the plane? And not only
Right.
that, how do we land and run the plane when we've got a little conflict going on, right?
Right. Yeah.
Conflict not only in the world, but conflict in in terms of layoffs, and how do we sort of repurpose ourselves around being a good operating company?
Right. Exactly. And so and I guess to build on that, Carrie, what are you seeing with your clients now or the companies or just in general? It seems like there is a lot of transition happening. Companies either to your point laying off or some companies scaling up. I knew some companies during COVID that couldn't hire people fast enough. And then I knew other companies that couldn't fire people fast enough, right? Just to survive. And so there was lots of there was market segments that were booming and then there were market segments that were crashing at that very same time. So it was very polarizing almost to watch. So I guess what are you seeing currently? Where do you think the biggest leadership, I'll say, challenges, opportunities are? What are leaders? Because it seems like all leaders are kind of struggling right now with how to navigate this world.
Well, and I'll go back to the guest that you had that talked about the life quick. I think
Yeah.
one of the things that podcast shared
Hmm.
was, that it really takes 4 to 5 years to
Right.
kind of come through a
Mhm.
great moment like that. And if you
Right.
look at it, I mean, we're really in sort of year one of coming out of one of the biggest times we've ever seen in our lifetime, for sure.
Yes.
But also, in addition to that, you're looking at the largest sort of like director level, mid level, and sort of executive level right now are millennials.
Hmm.
Most millennials have also not been through a moment of big contraction.
Right.
Right. So you really have, multiple, not only like business level dynamics that are happening where people were hiring and then all of a sudden we're contracting, but you've also got these internal emotional dynamics that are
Hmm.
happening for people. We haven't even begun to come through that sort of 45-year moment, right? Of like
Right.
what
Exactly.
happens as individuals and then as society and then as business society. So the tumultuousness of experiencing sort of like this rapid growth and then this shutdown and then now this sort of we're kind of coming back, but are we really coming back and what's happening? I think it's very rough on people as human beings.
Right.
And so what I'm seeing with a lot of my leaders is how do I manage my own emotions? Number one, how do I
Hmm.
how do I manage what's happening with me?
Hmm.
Right. And then
Hmm.
number two, how do I now manage leading a company where maybe I am having to either contract because my runway is shorter or I'm needing to lay people off? Or maybe
Yep.
I'm in a fortunate position where I'm in an innovation space where I'm in an innovation time, but the rest of the world isn't coming along with me in that journey.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
So there's some nuance to working with a variety of different levels of what we're experiencing on the individual level, on the social level, and then at the business level as a result of all of that.
And I'm sure that's I know it is a process to learn skills to navigate all that. If we could kind of discern some of like when you're talking to leaders about how to manage their own emotions, what do you typically help them, focus on? So if somebody listening right now and that's leading people can be like, "Oh, okay, this I can lean into this." Because with this podcast, I hope that people find value for their life, not that it's I hope I'm entertaining. I hope people find, that my story is entertaining in some way, shape, or form, and your story is entertaining and enjoy it. But ultimately, hopefully when they walk away from listening, the value is that they just learn something that they can apply immediately or at least contemplate on to apply. And so for leaders, when you got all this stuff happening, how do you stay focused? How do you stay centered, I guess is a better way to put it.
So I once heard very early on in my life a great quote that was most human beings live about 20 feet in front of themselves. They live, so they walk around
Yeah.
almost projecting their actual self in front of
Mhm.
their body.
Right.
Right. And you can almost imagine this, right? When we
Yeah.
walk through the world, try it, right? You said you took a hike this morning, for
Yeah, I
example.
was
Try
that
to,
was
right?
that
It's
was
like,
yeah. That was
so
exactly where I was at this morning. I was literally doing what you're talking about. I was literally thinking of a text that I wanted to send when I got back to the car, and then I'd be like, "What am I doing? I am living," to your point, I wouldn't have thought of it as 20 feet, but it's basically I'm living in the car sending the text. I need to be living on this walk right now, breathing the air and letting the rain hit my face, right?
that's so beautifully said. And there's a way that every day that we're in any meeting we're in, whether we're a leader or otherwise, whether we're running a company or we're in middle management or whether we're just starting out, that every opportunity is a moment to sit in a meeting and feel the rain hit your face and feel your feet hit the pavement. The tricky part is we forget how to do that. Some of us never really learned how to do that.
Right, right.
So you talked about, I teach a course at Stanford where
Mhm.
you have high achievers. These are masters of business, MBA students, right? Who've been achieving most of their lives. And usually
Yeah,
they're coming in at like
they're coming
25 to
back.
35 years of
Yeah.
age, right?
Right, yeah.
And they've been living in the headspace for so long that to even ask them what they're feeling takes a good month to put them back in their body and connect us back into our feelings.
Right, yeah, yeah.
Right?
Mhm.
And we can maybe like we oftentimes will think we know what we're feeling because we're thinking our way to a feeling,
Right.
but we actually don't know what we're feeling.
Right. Yeah.
What do you think the number one way is to know what you're feeling?
I haven't read the answer, so I would just think breathing. I guess for me, it's
Oh,
breathing.
that's a very good guess. I say it's slowing down,
Gotcha.
slowing down, right? Slowing
Mhm.
down to speed up, slowing down to be with yourself, slowing down to be in the room you're in, slowing down on your hike to
Right.
be where you are. And in that slowdown, oftentimes, The Body Keeps the Score is a fantastic book, right? Where the body knows oftentimes through feeling space, through what the body is sensing,
Right.
what the right answer is, what the right way to go is, what the right next move is. And that is requires so much less energy than
Mhm.
trying to figure it out 20 feet in
Right.
front of ourselves with the brain. So one
Right.
of the first things I'll do with the leaders I coach is put them back in their body,
Mhm.
right? What is it you're feeling? Can you name what you're feeling? Half the time it's no, right? I don't know
Yeah.
what
Right. Yeah.
I'm just in a scatter. I'm
Mhm.
trying to figure out how do I keep pushing? How do I not lay people off? And so that first step one is how do we go back in the body? Slowing down. And how I slow down oftentimes is through noticing the breath. I have a heavy meditation mindfulness piece to
Mm.
my coach.
Mhm.
I don't always call it that because different people have different reactions to that.
Right.
But what I will do is have people just slow down for the
Mhm.
hour that they're with me
Mhm.
and name what's happening.
Mhm.
And then we try exercises to bring that into the room. Okay, how are you going to do this in a conversation with your VP over there? How
Right.
are you going to do this in a conversation with your investor or with your
Mhm.
board? How are you
Mhm.
going to do this when you're actually getting that board presentation ready?
Right. Yep.
Right.
Mhm.
So it's that difference for you from,
Mhm.
constructing the text 20 feet of yourself.
Right.
Imagine how that would have been for you
Mhm.
to just feel the rain, feel your feet,
Yep.
and know that that text will come organically by you just being where you are.
Yes. And for me, I started singing. To be honest with you, I
Oh,
started
that's a
singing.
great.
I didn't do it consciously. I just started singing, and it wasn't a song. It was just like I was singing as I was walking, kind of as a meditative prayer with God. And so I just started singing this song to God, and it was like, but it was a conversational, and I didn't do it as a present practice. It just happened because I slowed, to your point, slowed down, and I wasn't trying to be in my car writing a text, which I didn't actually write or send. So that became my meditative practice, right? And that brought me back to feeling the rain on my face, as I was singing. So
Yeah.
it kind of got
Yeah.
me out of my head to some degree and let me get back in my body.
Well, this is the thing. I think it is so easy. So I was to give you a little bit more about my background. I was the CMO for almost 30
Oh,
years before I
uh-huh.
became an executive coach, and I built six startups.
Nice.
Exited to public.
Mm.
Before
Mhm.
that, I'd been in advertising agencies working on really big
Mhm.
Fortune 50 companies. So
Right.
I can tell you that firsthand that if someone had told me you need to slow down, I think I would may have my middle finger may have come
Yeah,
up, right?
I was just
Because
thinking
I
you
was
would
like,
you would salute them with
yeah,
right.
thank you so much for that unhelpful
Right.
feedback. But
Right, right.
and so I think it's important for us to talk about here on your
Mhm.
podcast that
Mhm.
slowing down is a practice. It is
Yes.
literally a practice. And oftentimes singing or skiing or
Mm.
running are
Yep.
ways that we implore our entire system to slow down. This doesn't mean that you're actually producing any less. And this is a hard
No.
piece for leaders
Right.
to wrap their head around,
Right. Well,
right? That in the slowdown, more production actually can happen.
exactly. And the lesson a lot of times I hear people referencing with like high performing sports athletes is it's the recovery time that determines if you're going to be professional or not. Can you recover faster? And by faster it means taking actual time to recover, not build. You don't practice every single day because you're going to break your body down. It's like it's these practices of recovery. Recovery is the most important part to the practice because the better I recover, the more I can grow. And I think in leadership, it's got to be the same way. How do we get good? Which I sucked at and still am learning. How do we get good at kind of that recovery and what's recovery mean? Kind of that breath, walking, running, meditation, what prayer, whatever that is for that
Right.
individual.
Right.
Yeah, because it actually, to your point, allows us to actually be more productive, even though it may seem slower, if that makes sense.
Yes. Yes. And they the practice of prayer or the practice of
Mhm,
meditation or the practice of running,
mhm.
all of those, the word practice is so important because
Right,
we're not practicing to practice. We're practicing for the game. We're
right,
practicing for the show,
right.
right? So the real idea behind it, to your very, very valid point, is am I recovering or practicing so that I'm just then having more polarity, right? Where
Mhm,
I'm then recovering really hard.
mhm,
So I just
mhm.
go down really hard and then I blast myself back
Right,
up.
right, right.
Or am I actually practicing so that when I'm in the room, when I'm in the moment,
Mhm.
that practice is applied immediately and without us, over time without us having, to think about
Right.
it, right? It
Yep.
happens less and less. You can look at really terrific archetypes of leaders and CEOs
Mhm,
that we love that have come from our generation, for example.
mhm, mhm.
And you will notice that those who are slow and steady, you can tell they're laying back, they're taking it easy. I
Right,
can actually tell when they're in their body,
right,
right? Versus those that are like spinning out of control in their
right,
head,
right.
right? And there's a way that the people who are slowing down and in their body and able to speak from the whole person that they are
Mhm.
garnering the support of teams around them
Right.
and having more productive conflict, having more productive conversation. It's so inane to me that we think that we should check all of ourselves in some way, parts of ourselves at home when we go into quote unquote work mode,
Right.
right? And that
Yep.
somehow all those emotions and all those pieces of ourselves go away. Guess what? It's still there.
Right.
And it
And
lurks below the surface until we have
exactly.
to recover for like 2 weeks because we're burned out.
Right. Exactly. Yes. Yeah, if we
Right.
can't bring our whole selves to work, then where are we, then we're
Where
divided,
are we?
right? Yeah, where are
We're
we?
divided, right? And we're going from blasting off to recovering or practicing. So many of the times you see people practicing yoga and then they,
Mhm.
they roll up their mat and they get in the car and suddenly they're in traffic having like road rage, right? So it's like, well,
Right.
how do we like integrate these experiences of practicing the slowdowns so that the slowdowns actually happen when you're
Yeah.
having the toughest conversation you've had with your investor
Mhm.
and you're having that conversation from a slow place. Very different.
Yeah, and I think more compassion flows in, more humanity flows in when you're in that space, and they can sense that. So there's usually, from my experience at least, even if there's conflict, that it may come up momentarily, but then at some point there's this human connection that kicks in, and there's understanding that may have not been or would not have been there had there been an agenda and everything's in the head and everything's in a PowerPoint and everything. I'm going to make all these points. It's like I remember I've had to have some tough conversations with investors, in that gym, and it was literally I said, "Let's just you wanna have a talk? Let's just talk at your house, right? And here's where
Mhm.
I'm just laid all the cards out, and through that transparency, it went from, a very contentious thing to hugging and, refriending each other and just, being human beings and understanding that we all got hit, right? We all got hit. It wasn't that anybody was doing anything one way or another. It's just the world shifted and we didn't see it. Who could have predicted that shift?
Who could have predicted that shift? And guess what? We'd like to all stop talking about those things. And I don't think anyone wants to talk about the pandemic anymore. But
Exactly. Right.
what's so important to recognize to coming back to like, where are we today? Right.
Yes.
Is
Mhm.
that we're still in, not only did we not come out of the pandemic and everyone was so, eager to forget about it, and myself
Right.
included, right?
Right.
And then we suddenly go into this next shift, right? Which is this
Mhm.
sort of shift to normalcy, let's call it, from
Right.
the rapid sort of ascent to the pandemic to the shift to normalcy, just like you talked about with Steve Jobs to then
Mhm.
he came back and then the shift to 10,
Right.
right? We're sort of in this place of um, kind of recovering still
Right.
and finding
Totally.
our feet in
Mhm.
all of that. You said something I thought that was very wise, which is listeners want tangibility. And so what is something
Mhm.
tangible? You talked about
Mhm.
the breath,
Mhm. Mhm.
coming to the breath. The interesting piece about the breath, there's a couple interesting pieces about the breath. I'm sure listeners have heard notes of this from many places. But two things that I love. Number one, the spaces between the inhale and the exhale, the brain actually has a very difficult time processing or thinking.
Mhm.
So when we sit down to breathe, one of the things that's happening in our bodies, if we're breathing slow enough to notice the pause between the inhale and the exhale, is that our brain slows down,
Mhm,
right? And
mhm,
it allows us to reconnect into our body,
mhm,
right? The second thing that the breath can do is a lot of times I start people off and I'll do exercises with my clients,
mhm.
right? That is like I'll start off sometimes depending on how they're coming to the session. If they're like, I'm coming here, I need to talk. I might
Right,
slow them down and try to do a little
right,
breath work with them.
right.
Sometimes we don't. But when we do, the first thing we'll ask them to do is notice where the breath is stopping in the body.
Mm, mhm.
Sometimes, for me too, it can stop at the throat.
Right,
Like
right.
we're like, it does like we're walking. That kind
Yeah,
of mimics that feeling of walking 20 feet in front of ourselves, right? We're sort of stopping at the throat and we're 20 feet in front
mhm.
of ourselves.
Yep,
And
right, totally in our
so
heads. Yep,
the second thing that I love about the breath is we can encourage it to come down deeper into the body. Can it come
right.
to my chest? Can it come to my upper belly, my lower belly, all the way down to my feet?
Mhm,
So that's one great exercise. The second tangible piece of how
mhm,
do I slow down? How do I even know where I'm actually? How do I know if I'm in my body? Is to feel the hands and feet,
mm.
like to feel what it feels like slowly to grip the fingers, release the fingers, or to move the toes. Like we forget about our feet so often during the day. We're sitting, maybe we're standing, and our feet will remind us that we're here and standing at our desk. But even
Right.
so, like just moving the toes around, feeling
Mhm,
the bones in the feet
mhm,
and grounding ourselves back into our body in the middle of tough conversations is very helpful to begin to know where our body's at.
mhm.
What is our body feeling? What
Totally.
emotion is present? So what emotion is present for you right now during our
I'm
podcast?
I'm just enjoying the moment. I'm enjoying the reminder that in the last probably 2 or 3 well, probably 3 months, I've really been focused on what we've been talking about here today, which is, I've done different leadership training, I've done different spiritual training, I've done different meditation training. I used to teach meditation. And in all of that, it never really clicked until about the last 3 months of how, we can use the body as a vehicle for presence and awareness of the situation, that can give us wisdom that's beyond our own wisdom, right? It gives, or at least it allows us to calm down, it allows the nervous system to calm down, and then we make decisions from a different space. And so have you heard of 75 hard? This challenge that people do, the 75 hard.
No.
Okay. Well, okay. So there's this challenge going around kind of in the CrossFit community. I'm not a CrossFitter, but in the CrossFit community and some of the other kind of athletic communities, is basically you have to do these things for 75 days straight without fail. One of them is you work outside for 45 minutes, then you have to do another workout for 45 minutes that are separate. You have to drink a gallon of water. You have to read 10 pages of a book. You have to take a picture. There's one other, I can't remember what the other one is off the top of my head. But so I started doing this when I moved to Asheville, North Carolina. But I incorporated in cold plunging, which I had done cold plunging just a little bit earlier in the year, but I said, I'm gonna cold plunge every day that I'm doing this 75 days, I'm gonna cold plunge, which I did. And that cold plunging was interesting because it made me get in my body and feel my body, and that allowed me to be super present because it was painful, right? So you
Mhm.
jumping in, you're in 45, 50, 55-degree water for 3 to 5 minutes at least, and all of a sudden, I started to actually feel the body was more of a vehicle than me, right? Than Matt. It was like, basically, this is my car, right? And there was a little bit of distance, but in a good way, where I wasn't distancing from my body, but I was feeling my body. And that allowed me then to start feeling in general, where before I'm so type A and in my head a lot and have been most of my life that I wasn't really, even though I thought I was slowing down, I wasn't really slowing down, right? I was just taking time to to, um, to self-soothe or to try to avoid the stuff that was haunting or chasing me, right? And
Mhm.
and so during this time, the for me, I hiked every day, so hiking and then doing these cold plunges, it literally showed me that the body is a beautiful vehicle to take us to where we want to go if we, use it that way versus everything's just kind of jumbled together and it's just thinking happening, right? And the
That's
body's
right.
just kind of going along for the ride.
Well, you said it beautifully, and I would encourage everyone to imagine in every instant of their life that they're taking a cold plunge.
Yeah,
Right?
right,
And then we're so in touch
right,
with
right. What
every
we're
piece of
feeling.
our skin,
Yeah.
what we're feeling, that we're in the
Yes.
cold plunge all the time.
Right.
And I also would say that wouldn't it be great if we didn't have these 30-day, 75-day? I mean, it's great that those are
Right.
Kickstarters, right?
Right.
But the
Right.
idea is really to come back to polarity is to use those moments in our lives, to use the cold plunge, which I'm a big fan of. We have one outside the house. I
Oh,
love
I
cold
love it.
plunging,
Yeah,
but
yeah, yeah.
it's a great
Yeah.
vehicle for getting in touch with awareness. Right.
Yes.
But to your point, right?
Yeah.
We can use these as like hitting the relief button,
Right.
or we can use these practices, these moments as integrate them back into how am I showing up at work? How am I
Right.
showing up in the hardest moments of my life?
Right.
How
Right.
am I showing up when I'm so stressed out and I've got deliverables and I've got investor money running out and I've got, we can add it up,
Mhm.
right? Totally integrating that in every moment in time.
Mhm.
So I'm
Yeah.
glad to hear in this moment in time that it sounds like you're feeling enjoyment, curiosity,
Yes. Yeah.
right?
Yeah, totally.
And
Totally, yes.
and to even just be with the moment between you and I in this podcast and our
Mhm.
listeners are listening,
Mhm. Mhm.
right? To notice enjoyment
Mhm.
and to be with the texture of what that feels like
Mhm.
in the body. What is it, how does it actually feel inside the texture of the skin? And this is something when I started to do it. Now here's my secret. I was horrible. Talk about passion. I had way too much passion,
Right.
not enough slowing down.
Right.
I did
Yep.
not have training that came through my family of
Mhm.
origin in how to
Right.
behave.
Right.
I was your confident, brilliant bull in a china shop.
Right. Yep.
I had to break a lot of things to get to the point where I felt okay slowing down. Like it got so broken that I had no choice, right? It was like, here,
Mhm.
Carrie, I
Yes.
would get
Yep.
that great message, which is brilliant marketer and really difficult to work with, right? Right?
Right.
Like, and I can make arguments about being a woman. I can make arguments
Right.
about being in marketing that made that hard. But at the end of the day, I take responsibility.
Right.
And
Yeah.
what changed for me
Mhm.
was the moment that I started to realize that there was work I had to do internally on my emotional self to even know what I was feeling
Right.
so that I could begin to unpack those very snap moments when I
Mhm.
am moving quickly and I'm doing something that was creating disconnection or harm with my team.
Right.
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 And so that led me on the path of how do I learn to be better by slowing down? How do I learn to be better by feeling my feeling? How do I
And
learn to be better by understanding that every minute of texture of my life?
mhm. Well, and I think for most type A personalities, and even other personalities, but especially for type A, we have to get to that point
Mhm.
for type A's, typically we're all about efficiency at some point. We want to win. And a lot of times efficiency's in the win. We want to be able to scale, we want to be able to grow, we want to be able to push, but that means we have to be more efficient. And we get to a point where we become less and less efficient because we're breaking down more often. We're being broken more often. And then we have to do these practices. So these practices, for at least for me, they didn't come out of, hey, I want to be more well balanced and I want to do this. No, it was this shit hurts. It sucks. My stuff's not working. The stuff's falling apart. I need to find a solution, and in the finding of the solution came the practices. It wasn't that I was doing it to be
Exactly.
right. It wasn't that I was doing it to be a better human being, even. It was because it was like, this hurts a lot. And if I want to get done what I want to get done, and then life has its way of being humorous, I feel that, through that, then awareness flows in and hey, maybe there's more to life than work and more to life than just pushing and, dollars in the bank. And all of those things come from the practices that I started to do because I was just trying to recover enough to do more of it. Right.
I love it. And I love what you said. Of all the things that you just said, the thing that struck me is this hurts a lot.
Yeah.
Right. And we go through these pains, in life.
Hmm.
And I had this fantasy at one point that I was going to do a podcast called Finding Treasures in the Trash, which was all
Yeah.
about, you
Yeah.
know, you kind of have to get to these extreme points
Yes.
sometimes where we
Yeah.
break down or where we just can't pull any more out of ourselves or our
Hmm.
team or our company,
Right.
right? Where something has to give,
Hmm.
Right. And in those moments of give, in those moments of breakdown, we can kind of
Mhm.
find ourselves on our hands and our knees, either
Mhm.
metaphorically or physically.
Yeah,
Right.
both
And that
usually.
happens
Yeah.
with athletics too.
Yeah.
Right. Same
Mhm.
thing. We
Yep.
have to get to these pain points where we know something has to change. Right. We have
And
to do something differently.
I've been doing this podcast long enough that I get to meet incredible people like you, Carrie, that are leaders that have kind of been down the road, have broken it, and then figured out how to unbreak it, and then are preparing probably to break it again. But what I've noticed, without fail, the most successful people have practices, usually morning. I'll call them rituals, but morning practices that they do first. Whether it's working out, could be meditating, journaling, doing they have like a quiet time in the morning where they're doing something that puts them in touch with their feelings or in their heart, or planning, even just planning for the day. And without fail, when I've asked that question on the show, it always comes back to they weren't doing those things. Their life, their business started to go off the rails. Then as they started to get their shit together, they started using these practices, and through these practices, that's how they maintain life balance. And then when they don't use these practices, things start to slide, right? And because there's that always usually that ebb and flow with life.
Yeah. Do you want to know my second little dirty secret? I don't
Yes,
have a
here we go.
great morning practice at all. I'm horrible. I've always been horrible in the morning. I'm
Yes.
awful. I'm not a 4 a.m. wake up. I don't
No,
do
I'm not
any of
either.
those things. But do
Right.
you want to know what I've made my practice? This moment here,
Mhm.
the moment that I come into a relationship with someone else is the moment my practice starts in the morning, whether that's my husband,
Oh, right. I love it. Yeah.
whether that's my
Mhm.
Amazon delivery person.
Mhm.
Every moment of interrelating with another human being is my moment of practice, because that's for me where my edge was.
Got it. Oh, I see what you're saying.
So
Yes.
I
Yeah.
can do solo and quiet
Right.
really well,
Right.
right? But
Yes.
my edge was when another person's stuff,
Right.
whatever it is,
Hit your stuff.
hit my stuff,
Right.
right? In the moment of the
Yeah.
stuff colliding,
Yeah.
that was the moment of practice.
Mm.
That was the sit down point for me.
Yes.
That's the slow down time for me. It's very
Interesting.
opposite, right? So,
Yeah.
you know, that's not to say I did meditate this morning, but that's just an exception. I have a hard time. So
Right.
I like to tell people this, right? Because I think so often we live in the fantasies of 75
Hard, yeah. Mhm.
hard,
Yeah.
right? Or full 30, or
Yeah, yeah, right.
if I could just do 10 or 15 minutes in the morning and 10 or 15 minutes.
Mhm,
So often we're living and striving to
mhm,
make time in life when we don't have that kind of time. And
mhm.
nobody's going to do 75 hard. I can tell you that for their whole life. Again,
No, no, it is not designed.
right? It's not designed for that.
Right,
And
and it's not
I
designed, yeah.
know nothing about it. So
Yeah, yeah.
I'm not in a
Well, but
position to
not like anything
critique
else.
it, but like anything
It's
else.
a training regime, and then you figure out how to integrate into your life some of that training, yes.
Yes. And so to our point about practice, right?
Mhm,
My practice now is every moment that I am in an interaction with another human being or a group of human beings. How do I make that my practice?
mhm,
And there's, at Stanford, we talk about the intrapersonal, which is knowing myself, the
right.
interpersonal, and the group level,
Mhm,
right? And so a great leader is going to know all three. I
right.
can guarantee you, most of the time, type A's spend very little on any of the three. I don't.
Right,
Because, like you said,
right.
we are a goal. Let's go set a goal.
Let's
We're
go
going to
get it
break the
done.
goal. Set the
Right,
new goal. Break the next goal. Set the next
right.
goal. Break
Yep,
the next goal.
right.
And oftentimes, what happened for me when I was 39, I'm 50, almost 58 now. When I was
Mhm,
39, I had a moment where I was like, hold on, I keep crushing every goal I set. And then I just want another goal and another goal and another goal. If that became a life, maybe, right? That's part of
Right.
the fun of life. It is
Mhm.
for people like you and I.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah, we
well,
like to
there's
win.
how it
Yeah,
goes like
yeah,
that. We like
yes, yeah.
that. But I also read a really profound book when I was 15 years old, The Death of Ivan Ilyich, which is a Russian philosopher, that where
Mhm,
he was suddenly given 3 weeks to live, and he had this terminal disease, and he was bedridden, and he just had to sit and think about the life
mhm,
that he led.
mhm,
And this moment of 15 and 39 came together for me in this cataclysmic collision in which I quit my job and I went traveling for like 2 years and had, meditated in the Himalayas for 3 months in silence and went to
Mhm.
Africa and, went on that search that many people
Right.
go.
Yes. Yes.
And what I really, really, what it really came down to for me is I can keep having the goals of crushing it, which I still do.
Mhm.
But there was this other kind of moment that I had with myself, which is like, is there more
Mhm.
beyond crushing the goals? And for
Right.
me, where that landed was in this idea of interpersonal, intrapersonal, and group.
Mhm.
How am I when I'm with people?
Mhm.
How am I when I'm with myself? And how do I get really good at all three of those?
Right.
That makes a great leader, in my
I
opinion.
and that's yes, and which makes usually great companies, right? And great
And we usually
culture.
don't do it.
Right.
Right? We
Yep.
don't do it. We go after the next and the next. And, okay, I'm
Mhm.
going to crush it. I'm going to take this company public and I'm going to start the next one.
Mhm.
Because, you know, that particular archetype of human being is so ripped
Mhm.
to crush goals that the idea of actually knowing themselves or knowing how they are in relationship or knowing how they influence a group doesn't feel in the realm of possibility or in the realm of interest,
Right. Yep.
right? Until they have maybe what you're calling that sort of recovery breakdown,
Yeah, heart attack,
right?
stroke, divorce, you know, the
You
death
name
of
it.
a loved one, but something's gonna come along and help, help them, readjust priorities and look at life maybe more broadly, right? And more fully and more richly, hopefully, through that. I mean, sometimes it
That's
takes
so
I heard the preacher on Sunday said, "Do we get grace or do we get abundance?" Grace is our life was spared. Abundance is we learned a lesson, and that lesson blossomed in our life, and we were able to, live a better
mm,
life, not just survive the moment. And it all came back to practice. What am I practicing, right? What's my practice in life, so that I'm prepared for those moments of challenge or what battle or whatever that is, but yes, in that practice comes the abundance, and we see that in companies, we see that in people. We love those stories, right? We love the hero's journey stories where somebody was maybe on top and then they fell and then they rose again, right, like the phoenix from the flame. We love it because there's a lot of beauty in it. There's a lot of growth. There's a lot of we all want that in our lives, I think, even when we uh don't want it in our lives.
I think so too. This is this beautiful Russian story where unfortunately he didn't find it out until the last 3 weeks of his life, and
Right.
I'm always hopeful that I think I've dedicated my life's work now
Hmm.
that leaders in business will have a moment,
Hmm.
whether that hopefully it's not the big moment of divorce or
Right.
death, but
Right.
hopefully they're just having a moment
Right.
where they have a wonderment
Yep.
about what is the meaning of their own existence. And in that wonderment, it's just you can still crush your goals. We can still go
Right.
out there and be badass business people. They are not separate,
Right. I
right?
agree
Which I
with that.
think
Yep.
so often we think they are. And can
Yes.
I actually cultivate and practice, to your great word, can I start to practice ways of being in the world that I can take with me to work that make my company win bigger and better? I don't have to suffer. I can be in more connection with my body and my feelings and my life and the juiciness of
Mhm.
all of that.
110%. 110%.
110%.
110%. So, wisdom, what's your one you've given us lots of wisdom today, but what's your one kind of we'll take off the parameters of business, and we'll say if there's one piece of wisdom that you've gleaned throughout your life that you think would really impact and help others, what would that one piece of wisdom be?
I'm sure this has been said in millions of ways over time, but I think for me, it is life. A life well lived is not built in our accomplishments alone. A life well lived is built in moments like these where we're present with each other. There are two moments in life that this happens most pronounced. One is when we have the death of someone we care about, and the
Mhm.
other is when we fall in love.
Mhm.
And in those two very extreme emotions, we become really present to our lives. Have you ever watched a friend who's just fallen in love?
Mhm. Oh, yeah.
Like
Yep.
like you
Yes.
see it, right? Like
Right.
everything about their being changes
Mhm.
for the period of time that they're falling in love. And it is not so far from grief. Everything changes when we're in grief for the time that we're in grief.
Mhm.
And so my wisdom would be, let's not have it be only when we're falling in love and only when we're in grief. Let's have it be every moment that we get a chance to be present fully with our life.
Mhm. I agree. Well, that's another piece of wonderful wisdom, Carrie. I appreciate that.
Sure. It's so
So,
lovely talking to you.
yeah, I've had a great thank you. And that brought up stuff right there at the end. Your wisdom touched me. So your website is carijacobs.com, Cari Jacobs. That should be fairly easy. .com, and that's where you have kind of your a little bit more about what you do and how you do it, and
Yes.
the ways you lead and guide leaders. And we appreciate the work you're doing out there in the world.
Thank you. And I also offer, if you come to my website,
Hmm. Hmm.
carijacobs.com, I offer
Hmm.
a free session. And I do that because I think oftentimes people don't really understand what that coaching is. They think
Oh
it's
yeah,
business
right,
coaching or,
right.
what that is it life coaching
Hmm.
and what is
Right,
leadership coaching? And
right.
so I offer an hour so that you can directly experience it and
And
decide for yourself if it's something you want to
engage with.
proceed with. Yeah.
And I think, just for my own side, I've done leadership training and it's been invaluable in my life, right? I mean, year-long programs that are similar to MBA that like literally engage thousands of dollars in time and, travel and everything. And it always is worth more than the lift. It is always worth more because you just learn so much about yourself. You learn how to communicate with others. Leadership training, I think's one of the I don't care if you're running, a household of kids or if you're the CEO of Apple. Leader you Leadership training just always pays dividends. It just
It
always
always
does.
does. I can tell you that, they survey the students
Mhm,
in the MBA program,
mhm.
obviously, the MBA program at Stanford, and they ask, what has been the most impactful course at Stanford? And I'm happy to say that the touchy-feely course is often, if not 80 to 90% of the time, my favorite course because of what you're saying, right?
Right.
Like, we can keep doing the do, we can keep running all the businesses in the world, we can keep
Mhm,
inventing it, we can keep creating. But if we're not present to it,
mhm,
put it off or not,
mhm.
right? So that presence is so much of leadership is about being present to your experience and present to your team and present to how you show up, present to how you're changing. So
Yes.
really, I'm so grateful that you've done all the work that you've done, Matt. It's
Mhm.
such a great opportunity to meet you.
Yes, it was so much fun, and when you get out to Asheville, come out, we'll hike, we'll cold plunge, and
I
we'll
would
go out for
love
some
that.
we'll go out for some good food. You can run around, or you can see my 2 little hoodlums that run around here, my house, my kids, and they're a ton of fun. It's like a circus here, but I enjoy it. So we have fun with what we got out here.
Lovely. Don't be surprised if you actually get a call from
Any day.
me.
Everybody's welcome. Come out, and I love playing here, and I love to share it with others. So yeah, anytime.
Thank you.
Thank you for being a part of the Bright Vibe podcast. For more information, go to britevibe.com. That's BRITE vibe, VIBE.com. Thank you for listening.